We're moving closer.
Authorities are now confirming this is not debris.
If this image is real, everything we know changes tonight.
The ocean is a beautiful liar on the surface. It sparkles with the promise of adventure and freedom. It looks like a paradise of turquoise water and golden sun. But if you strip away the beauty, if you look past the horizon, the ocean is nothing more than a desert. It is a merciless, infinite graveyard that swallows secrets and never give them back. It is a place where a human scream can travel for miles and yet be heard by no one. The date is November 16th, 1961. The location is in Northwest Providence Channel, a deep, lonely stretch of water in the Bahamas. The sun is at its peak, a blinding white, eye staring down from a cloudless sky. The heat is oppressive, shimmering off the water like a physical weight. Cutting through the stifling atmosphere is a massive steel beast, the Greek freighter ship known as the Captain Theo. The ship is a giant, vibrating with a hum of heavy engines, carrying cargo and a crew of men who are tired, bored, and longing for the sight of land. On the bridge of the ship, Second Officer Nikolaos Spachidakis is standing watch. It is a routine shift. He is scanning the endless blue horizon with his binoculars, not expecting to see anything other than an occasional seagull or a patch of floating seaweed. He sweeps the glass across the water. Left to right, the rhythm of the waves almost lulling him into a trance. But then, he stops. Something catches his eye. A tiny, almost invisible white speck bobbing in the distance. At first glance, it looks like trash, a discarded crate, or maybe a piece of styrofoam debris left behind by a fishing boat. Most sailors would have ignored it. The ocean is full of garbage, and the schedule of a freighter is tight. But something about this speck, something about the way it moves against the current, makes Nikolaos hesitate. He adjusts the focus on his binoculars. He leans forward, narrowing his eyes against the harsh glare of the sun. The image sharpens, and in that split second, the air leaves his lungs in a sharp, horrified gasp. "My God," he whispers. It isn't a crate. It is a cork float, a tiny, rectangular piece of emergency equipment, barely 4 feet long and 2 feet wide. It is a flimsy grid of cork and canvas, meant to hold supplies, not a person. But there, collapsed in the center of it, curled into a tight, fetal ball, is a human being. "Stop the engines." Nikolaos screams, his voice cracking with urgency. Man overboard, full reverse. The alarm bells begin to ring, shattering the silence of the afternoon. The massive ship shudders as the propellers fight against the momentum. The crew rushes to the railings, pointing, shouting in Greek, their faces pale with disbelief. As the ship drifts closer, the full horror of what they are seeing becomes clear. It isn't a man. It is a child, a little girl, no older than 11. She is wearing a thin white blouse and pink pants that are stained with oil and stiff with salt. Her blonde hair has been bleached almost white by the relentless sun. She is motionless. She looks like a broken doll that the ocean has chewed up and decided to spit out. Her skin is a map of agony, blistered, peeling, and burned to a deep, angry red. The sailors, hardened men who have spent their lives battling storms, feel tears welling up in their eyes. The sight is heartbreaking. She is so small, and the ocean is so big. They lower a makeshift wooden lift, shouting gently to her, urging her to move. "Grab the rope. Can you hear us? Grab the rope." For a moment, she doesn't move. She seems dead. But then, slowly, painfully, she lifts her head. Her eyes are swollen shut, fused together by salt and inflammation. She cannot see the ship. She cannot see the men. But she can hear them. With the last ounce of strength in her tiny body, she uncurls her fingers and reaches out blindly. A brave sailor jumps into the shark-infested water, risking his own life to guide her onto the lift. As they pull her up the side of the towering steel hull, the crew holds their breath. They lay her gently on the deck. They rush to bring her water, expecting her to beg for a drink. They expect her to scream for her mother. They expect the panic of a terrified child. But the girl doesn't ask for water. She doesn't cry. She tilts her head toward the sound of the voices. Her cracked, bleeding lips part. A whisper comes out, a sound so dry, so brittle, that the captain has to lean his ear close to her mouth to hear it. She whispers words that chill the blood of every man on that deck. "My daddy is dead," she rasps. "He killed them all." The sailors look at each other in stunned silence. The wind seems to grow colder. Who is he? Where is her family? How did an American girl end up floating on a piece of cork in the middle of the Atlantic for 4 days? To understand the nightmare this child has survived, and to understand the monster she is talking about, we have to look away from the rescue. We have to look back in time. We have to go back 4 days to a different rescue and a different story 4 days earlier. November 13th. The U.S. Coast Guard spots a wooden dinghy drifting in the shipping lanes. Inside sits a man. His name is Captain Julian Harvey. Julian Harvey is a handsome man, a former Air Force fighter pilot, a war hero. When the Coast Guard pulls him out of the water, he is weeping. He is performing the greatest acting role of his life. In the bottom of his dinghy lies the dead body of a 7-year-old girl named Renee. Captain Harvey tells the authorities a tragic, heartbreaking story. He says he was a captain of a luxury yacht called the Bluebelle. He says a sudden, violent squall hit the ship in the middle of the night. He claims the main mast snapped, piercing the hull like a spear. He says fire broke out. He tells the police, with tears streaming down his face, that he tried to save the passengers. He tried to save the Duperrault family, but the ship sank too fast. He says they all drowned. He says he is the only survivor, a tragic hero who lost everything but managed to save the body of one child. The world believes him. The newspapers print his picture. They call him a brave man. The police give him dry clothes, hot food, and their sympathy. He is allowed to go back to his motel room. He is allowed to walk free. But Captain Julian Harvey has made one fatal mistake. He thinks he has committed the perfect crime. He thinks the ocean has washed away his sins. He thinks that the witnesses, Arthur Duperrault, his wife Jean, and their 3 children, are all at the bottom of the sea, feeding the fish. He doesn't know about the Cork float. As the Captain Dio turns its engines toward Miami, carrying the girl with the swollen eyes, the clock begins to tick. The screen of fate has split in two. On one side, you have a psychopath relaxing in a motel room, thinking he's gotten away with mass murder. On the other side, you have an 11-year-old girl, fighting for every breath, holding a secret that will destroy him. The captain thinks he is safe. He thinks the story is over. But he is about to learn the hardest lesson of all. The ocean does not keep secrets forever. The ghost he thought he drowned is coming home. To understand the magnitude of the horror that took place on that Cork raft, we must first understand what was lost. Before the sunburn, before the thirst, and before the blood, there was only the dream. The story of the Bluebelle did not begin with a sinking ship. It began with a promise. Meet the Duperrault family. They were the very definition of the American dream. Arthur Duperrault was a 40-year-old optometrist from Green Bay, Wisconsin. He was a good man, a man who worked long hours fixing other people's eyes, while secretly dreaming of seeing the world with his own. His wife, Jean, was the heart of the family, kind, gentle, and utterly devoted to their 3 children. There was Brian, age 14, strong and adventurous. There was little Renee, age 7, the baby of the family. And in the middle was Terry Jo, 11 years old, a girl with bright eyes and a love for the water, so deep that she seemed more mermaid than human. For years, Arthur had saved every penny. He didn't want to spend another freezing winter in Wisconsin. He wanted to give his family a trip of a lifetime. He wanted to take them sailing through the turquoise waters of the Bahamas. He wanted to show them paradise. In November of 1961, they arrived in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The air smelled of salt and expensive sunscreen. And waiting for them at the dock was the Bluebelle. She was a beauty, a 60-foot ketch sailboat, painted a pristine white, with polished teak decks and tall masts that scraped the blue sky. To the children, she looked like a floating castle. To Arthur, she looked like freedom. But a ship is only as safe as its captain, and Arthur believed he had hired the best man for the job. Enter Captain Julian Harvey. On paper, Julian Harvey was a hero. He was a 44-year-old former Air Force lieutenant colonel, a bomber pilot who had flown combat missions in World War II in Korea. He was handsome, with a chiseled jaw, broad shoulders, and the confident, steady gaze of a man who had stared death in the face and won. When Arthur shook his hand, the grip was firm. Arthur looked at him and saw a protector. He saw a man he could trust with his children's lives. But the eyes are the window to the soul. And if anyone had looked closely enough at Julian Harvey's eyes, they might have seen the darkness swirling behind the charm. There was someone else on the boat who saw that darkness. The captain's wife, Mary Dean. Mary Dean was a former stewardess, young, beautiful, and newly married to Harvey. But she didn't smile like a newlywed. She moved around the deck quietly, almost like a ghost. She seemed nervous. When Julian spoke, she flinched. When he gave an order, she jumped. There were whispers among the dock workers, rumors of fresh bruises on her arms that she tried to hide with long sleeves. She looked like a woman walking on eggshells, terrified that one wrong step would shatter her world. But the Duperrault family was too blinded by the sun to notice the shadows. On November 8th, the Bluebelle cast off. The first few days were magical. They sailed from island to island, gliding over water, so clear it looked like liquid glass. They snorkeled among the coral reefs. They collected pink conch shells on deserted white beaches. They ate dinner on the deck under a blanket of stars that stretched to infinity. It was a perfect vacation. It was the happiest week of their lives. But happiness, in the presence of a psychopath, is a ticking time bomb. Sunday, November 12th, the final night of the trip. The Bluebelle dropped anchor near the Sandy Point Lighthouse. The ocean was dead calm. There was no wind. The water was like a black mirror, reflecting the full moon. It was a breathtakingly beautiful night, so silent that you could hear a fish jump 100 yards away. The family sat down for their last dinner together. They laughed. They toasted to the trip. Captain Harvey sat with them, smiling, telling war stories. He looked charming. He looked relaxed. But inside his mind, the gears were turning. The plan he'd been crafting, the dark, greedy scheme involving insurance, money, and murder, was about to be executed. Around 9 p.m., the party ended. Little Renee rubbed her eyes and yawned. Then Terry Jo, one by one, the family said goodnight. They went down the narrow stairs to their cabins below deck. Arthur and Jean went to the master stateroom. The children went to their bunks. Terry Jo changed into her pink pajamas. She climbed into her bed, pulling the soft sheets up to her chin. She could hear the gentle lap of the water against the hull. She felt safe. Her father was just down the hall. The war hero captain was on the deck. Nothing could hurt her here. She closed her eyes and drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep. But hours later, deep in the black heart of the night, the silence was shattered. Terry Jo's eyes snapped open. She lay frozen in the dark, her heart pounding against her ribs. She wasn't sure what had woken her up. Was it a noise? Was it a vibration? And then she heard it. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the waves. It was a scream. A short, sharp, terrifying cry of agony. Help! Daddy! Help! It was her brother, Brian. Then silence. A heavy, suffocating silence, followed by the sound of heavy boots stomping on the deck above her head. Thump, thump, thump. Terry Jo sat up in the darkness, trembling. The dream was over. The nightmare had arrived, and she was trapped in a small box, underwater, with a monster. The scream died away, leaving a silence that was heavier than the ocean itself. Terry Jo sat frozen in her bunk. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was 11 years old. She didn't understand violence. She didn't understand murder. She wanted to believe it was a nightmare, that she could just pull the covers over her head and wake up to the smell of pancakes and sunshine. But the silence was wrong. It wasn't the peaceful silence of sleep. It was the cold, electric silence of the aftermath. Trembling, She swung her legs out of bed. Her bare feet touched the floor. She walked to the door of her cabin. Her hand hovered over the brass knob. It felt cold. She turned it and pushed the door open. The air in the main cabin hit her first. It didn't smell like the ocean anymore. It smelled sharp, metallic, like copper pennies and raw meat. Terry Jo stepped into the kitchen area, the main salon where they had eaten dinner just hours before. The room was dimly lit by a small yellow nightlight, and in that faint, sickly glow, her childhood ended. She didn't scream. Her brain simply refused to process the image. Lying on the floor in a twisted, unnatural heap was her brother, Brian, and next to him was her mother, Jean. They weren't moving. They weren't breathing. A dark, spreading pool of liquid was inching across the floorboards, soaking into the expensive rugs. It was blood. Terry Jo stood there, a tiny figure in pink pajamas, staring at the ruin of her family. She looked for her father. She looked for the protector. But Arthur Duperrault was gone. Confusion, sharp and blinding, took over. She needed help. She needed an adult. She thought of the captain, the war hero, the man of steel. Surely, Captain Harvey would know what to do. Surely, he was fighting the bad guys right now, with tears stinging her eyes. She turned away from the bodies and ran toward the stairs that led up to the deck. She climbed one step at a time, slipping slightly on something wet. She burst out into the night air. The moon was still shining. The ocean was still calm. But standing near the cockpit was Captain Julian Harvey. He wasn't steering the ship. He was panting, breathing hard like an animal. He was sweating profusely, his shirt clinging to his chest. In his hand, something glinted in the moonlight. A bucket? A knife? It was a blur. Terry Jo looked at him, her eyes begging for an explanation. She walked toward him, confused, innocent. "Captain," she whispered, "is the boat sinking?" Harvey spun around. He looked at the child. He didn't look at her with concern. He didn't offer comfort. He looked at her with a mixture of annoyance and pure, cold hatred. He was in the middle of a job. He was cleaning up, and she was a loose end that refused to be tied. He didn't speak. He lunged forward, raising his hand. He shoved her violently. The force of the blow threw her backward. "Get back down there," he roared. "Get back in your room." Terry Jo scrambled back, terrified. This wasn't a charming pilot anymore. This was a monster wearing a man's skin. She stumbled back down the stairs, retreating into the dark belly of the ship. She ran back to her cabin, crawling onto her bunk, curling into a ball. She lay there, shaking, waiting for the end. But the nightmare was just getting started. As she lay in the dark, she heard a new sound. Gurgle, hiss, rush, water. It wasn't splashing against the outside of the hull. It was coming inside. Cold, black, oily water began to seep across the floor of her cabin. It rose quickly, touching the edge of her bed, soaking the mattress. The smell of diesel fuel filled the air, choking her. Terry Jo didn't know the technical terms. She didn't know that Harvey had opened the sea valves, the seacocks, intentionally flooding the engine room to sink the ship and hide the evidence of his massacre. All she knew was that the boat was dying. The floor tilted violently. She couldn't stay down there. If she stayed, she would drown in the dark with the bodies of her family. Summoning a courage that most adults do not possess, she climbed out of bed again. The water was up to her knees now. She waded through the rising flood, past the dark shapes of her mother and brother, and climbed the stairs for the second time. When she reached the deck, the Bluebelle was sitting low in the water. The bow was already dipping beneath the waves. Captain Harvey was at the stern. He had launched the ship's dinghy, a large, safe lifeboat. He had loaded it with food, fresh water, flares, and the dead body of little Renee, whom he planned to use as a prop for his grieving father act. He was preparing to leave. He was preparing to survive. Terry Jo walked toward him. She saw the dinghy floating alongside the sinking ship. The rope, the painter line, was still attached to the Bluebelle. She reached out and grabbed the rope, holding it tight. She looked at him. "Captain?" Harvey looked down at her, For a split second, time stood still. Here was a man who had killed her entire family. He was about to escape to safety. And here was an innocent child, standing on a sinking ship. He had a choice. He could pull her into the boat. He could show 1 ounce of mercy. Harvey looked at the rope in her hand. Then he looked at her face. He didn't pull her in. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his knife. With a dead, empty stare, he lunged forward. He cut the rope. He pushed off from the Bluebelle. He sat down in the dinghy, surrounded by supplies, and rowed away into the darkness. He left an 11-year-old girl standing on the deck of a sinking ship, alone, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The betrayal was absolute. He didn't just kill her family. He sentenced her to the deep. Moments later, the Bluebelle gave a final, agonizing groan. The stern lifted into the air. The deck slanted sharply. Terry Jo lost her footing. She slid across the wetwood, screaming as the ocean rose up to swallow her. The ship went down. Terry Jo was thrown into the black. Freezing water, the suction of the sinking ship, tried to pull her down with it. She kicked. She thrashed, fighting for air, fighting for life. She broke the surface, gasping, coughing up salt water. It was pitch black. She couldn't see the captain. She couldn't see land. She was treading water over thousands of feet of depth. But then, her hand brushed against something hard. It wasn't a boat. It wasn't a raft. It was a small, rectangular cork float, a piece of safety equipment that had broken free from the ship. It was tiny, barely 2 feet wide, just a grid of cork held together by canvas. Desperate, freezing and in shock, Terry Jo clawed her way onto the float. It wasn't big enough to keep her dry. Her legs dangled in the water. Her body was half submerged, but it kept her head above the waves. She curled up into a ball, clinging to the wet cork. The silence of the ocean returned. The screams were gone. The ship was gone. Her family was gone. She was 11 years old. She was alone in the dark. And beneath her feet, the sharks began to wake up. The sun rose over the Atlantic Ocean. But it brought no warmth. It brought only fire. Terry Jo sat on the tiny cork float, a square of canvas no bigger than a dining table. She was 11 years old. She was an orphan, and she was about to enter a level of hell that few human beings have ever survived. Day 1 turned into day 2, and the torture began in earnest. The tropical sun hammered down on her unprotected skin. It was relentless. 100 degrees of radiant heat reflecting off the water, cooking her alive. Her fair skin turned pink, then red, then blistered. Her lips swelled until they split open, bleeding into the salt water. Her throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. She had no fresh water. She had no food. She had no roof. She sat half submerged, her legs dangling into the water because there wasn't enough room to pull them up. And below the surface, the ocean began to feed. Tiny fish, attracted by the scent of her wounds, began to swarm around her legs. They nibbled at her toes. It started as a tickle, then became a sharp, stinging pain. But she was too weak to kick them away. At night, the terror shifted from the heat to the dark. The temperature dropped. She shivered uncontrollably in her thin pink pajamas. But the darkness brought something worse than the cold. Phosphorescence. Strange, glowing shapes began to move in the black water beneath her. Green and blue lights streaking through the deep. Terry Jo watched them, paralyzed with fear. She knew what they were. Large predators. Hunting. Once, deep in the night, she felt a heavy, dull thud against the bottom of her cork raft. The float tipped violently. Something massive had bumped her. A shark? A whale? She froze, holding her breath, praying that the creature wouldn't return to finish the job. She was a tiny speck of light floating on a dinner plate, surrounded by monsters. By day 3, her mind began to break. The thirst triggered hallucinations. The line between reality and madness blurred. She started to see things that weren't there. She saw a small island with palm trees just a few hundred yards away. It looked so real. She could see the coconuts. She could see the shade. Desperate, she slid off the raft and tried to swim toward it. She paddled with her weak arms, choking on salt water, but the island didn't get closer. It vanished like smoke. She was swimming toward nothing. Panic set in. She barely managed to claw her way back on the float, collapsing in exhaustion, realizing that her own brain was trying to kill her. The contrast. While Terry Jo was slowly dying of thirst, miles away, the man who put her there was living a lie. Captain Julian Harvey was safe on land. He was sitting in a comfortable chair. He was eating a hot meal. He was drinking fresh, cold water. He looked at the police officers with sad, tear-filled eyes. He told them about the tragedy. He told them how much he missed the family. He played the role of the grieving hero perfectly. He slept in a soft bed, confident that his secret was buried at the bottom of the sea. The mischance. But back on the ocean, on the morning of day 4, a sound cut through the silence. A drone. An engine. Terry Jo forced her swollen eyes open. High above, a small plane was crossing the sky. It was a search plane. Hope, hot and desperate, surged through her dying body. She tried to sit up. She ripped off her white blouse, waving it frantically in the air. She tried to scream, but her throat was so dry that only a raspy croak came out. "Look at me. I'm here. Please." She watched the plane get closer. She was sure they would see the white square of the raft against the blue water. She waited for the plane to bank, to turn around, to dip its wings. But the plane didn't turn. It kept flying in a straight line. The pilot, blinded by the sun or looking in the wrong direction, missed a tiny white dot. The sound of the engine faded away, leaving her alone in the crushing silence. That was the moment her spirit finally broke. The hope evaporated. She slumped back onto the wet cork. She dropped her hand into the water. She stopped waiting for rescue. She stopped waiting for her father. She closed her swollen eyes. Her breathing became shallow, a faint rattle in her chest. Her pulse slowed down. She accepted the darkness. She was ready to let go. She didn't know that a massive ship was just over the horizon. But as her heart beat slower and slower, it seemed like the rescue would be too late. The ocean decided to spare her. Just as Terry Jo's heart was beating its final rhythm, a shadow fell over her. The massive Greek freighter, the Captain Theo, blocked out the killing sun. The sailors lowered a lift and gently pulled the broken child from the jaws of death. She was rushed to a hospital in Miami, burned, dehydrated, but alive. News travels fast, but the truth travels faster. Miles away, in a quiet police interrogation room, Captain Julian Harvey was relaxing. He had just finished telling his lie again. He was playing the grieving hero. The police were nodding, getting ready to let him go. But then, the door opened. A police officer walked in. He was smiling. He looked at the captain and said, "Captain, we have incredible news." Harvey looked up. "News?" "Yes," the officer said. "We found a survivor." The room went dead silent. Harvey's heart skipped a beat. His confident mask cracked. "Who?" he whispered. The officer beamed. "The little girl. Terry Jo. She's alive." The blood drained from Julian Harvey's face. In that second, he knew. He knew the ghost had come back. He knew she would tell him about the blood, the knife, and the rope he cut. He forced a weak smile. "That's wonderful," he stammered. "Please, excuse me. I'm overwhelmed." He walked out of the station a free man, but a dead man walking. He drove straight to the Sandman Motel. He checked into room number 7. He wrote a short note. And then, using a razor blade, he ended his own life. He chose death over facing the eyes of the child he tried to kill. The truth finally came out. Harvey had killed his wife for insurance money. The Duperrault family had simply seen too much, and he slaughtered them to cover his tracks. But he failed. Terry Jo Duperrault didn't just survive. She thrived. She grew up, healed, and lived a long, peaceful life. She dedicated her years to water safety, protecting others from the dangers she knew too well. Julian Harvey thought the ocean was a graveyard that would hide his secrets forever. But he was wrong. He forgot that the ocean doesn't just take. Sometimes, it returns what belongs to the living.